Hi, I'm Debbie. Welcome to my studio. Today we are going to be painting this seashell design. I've got a list of all the supplies you'll need in the description box below. It's a really easy one. I'll walk you through every step. So remember, painting should be fun and relaxing. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, cup of tea, glass of wine, whatever you do, and let's have some fun. Cheers! Ooh, that's good. Okay, so let's just start off with sketching out the shell. I have a sketch up, I don't know if you can see it, so I'm gonna make it a little darker. So it's just gonna be an arch, big round, circular, have it curl in a little bit, and then it has a point down here, and just have that wrap around a little bit. And then this will be the underneath part of the shell, the inside part. And then just sketch in a little shoreline. You can have a slight wiggle to it, don't make it too crazy. And then what I like to do is I always use when I have my sketch just the way I want it, I use a hard pencil like a 2H or just a harder lead. If you only have a number 2, that's fine, don't worry about it. But I would just make sure you draw it, get it exactly how you want it, make sure your pencil's sharp, and then do a nice tight line. And then I erase all of as much lead off of it as you can. So if you're using a hard lead pencil, it's still gonna leave a little bit of it's gonna show the line still, but it's just not gonna be so smeary. So when we start painting, you don't want that graphite to smear into your paint. But see, you can still see the drawing. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. Okay, so let's get started with our color mixing. So as always, we have our primary colors, magenta, yellow, and the blue and white. With all my tutorials, I always just use a limited palette like this because I want you to learn how to mix all of your own colors. Now I could cheat and we're gonna be mixing a lot of a periwinkle shade. I use that color a lot. We could just pull out this light blue violet from the store, but you're not gonna be learning if you're just cheating and using it straight out of the tube. There's also the shell colors with the brown. We could use burnt umber and raw sienna, and those colors would be great, they'd be perfect. But I want you to learn how to make those colors yourself. And I would recommend, if you are a beginner, paint your first 20, 30, 40 paintings by only using the primaries, because you're gonna learn so much by making all of your own colors. It's gonna benefit you so much. So that's why all my tutorials, I always just keep it a very limited palette because I want you to get really good with mixing your color, because that's so important when you're an artist, to know how to mix an exact color. And pretty soon you'll get so good at it, you'll just see colors random places and you'll say, oh, I know how to make that color. And you'll be thinking about, how much blue you'd put in it or how much yellow, or I still do that all the time. When I see a really pretty color, I think, okay, how would I mix that? So when I'm doing my commission paintings or painting a mural or whatever, a lot of times I will, actually when I paint murals, I always use just the primaries because it's easier just to mix all my colors on site. But when I do a commission painting, I will sometimes pull colors out of the tube, but they're usually not perfect, so you always have to spice them up a little bit anyways. But if you don't know the basics by just working from primaries only, then you won't know where you're going with it. So just use the primaries, that's what I'd recommend. Okay, so let's start off. What I did is I did a little color swatch. Sometimes I'll do this before a painting, especially when I'm doing a painting that has really, really light colors. I tend to get too dark because I forget how light I want it to look in the end, and I'll get the colors too dark. So I will do a little swatch ahead of time. So these are the basic colors we're gonna be using throughout the painting. There's gonna be a little variety in between these, but overall those are pretty much as dark as I want them to get, and that probably won't even end up being that dark. We'll do a very light version of that, but that's the basic color sample swatch that we'll be doing, color palette. Okay, so let's start off with getting some of the water in there. So we're gonna take I'm using my 5/8 angular brush for this part. And I'm working on a 10 by 10 canvas, so it's pretty small. So we don't really need to use a really large brush for this. So we're gonna mix a very light aqua. So let's take a little bit of yellow and a teeny bit of blue. Maybe a little more blue. And I'm just mixing kind of a bluish green shade off to the side at first, because we want to keep it really, really light. Let's do a little more blue. And then we'll take a big scoop of white. Now we don't want to keep this really, really light, so we don't want to mix the white into that. We're going to end up with a giant pile because we barely want to add any color to this white pile. So I can already see this is a little too green. I want to make it a little bluer. So I'm going to mix it over on this side first before I mix it into the white. There's a little bit of white in there, but when you add a little bit of white to that color, you can really see what shade it's going to be, or what exact color it is. Let's do a little bit more blue. I want to have a little more bluish aqua. I think that will look good. Okay, so let's take our brush and mix it around in that white. And I just want to keep it really, really light. Maybe a little more of that. Okay, that looks pretty. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit up here. Just along the top. If you want to paint the edges of your canvas, you can do that too. Okay, I just want a hint of that color up there. Clean off the brush. Then we're gonna do a little bit of this sand color in the water. So let's take a little bit of yellow, a little bit of magenta. That was a lot. A little more yellow. We're gonna want to make a tan shade, so we're gonna also need a tiny bit of blue. Barely any. Ooh, see how much that gets in there. You barely need any of that. Let's just take a little bit of white and mix it in there so we can see what direction we're heading in. Alright, let's take a big scoop of white. And I'm not mixing it into that whole pile, I'm just doing it off to the side so I can see how dark I'm getting. I don't want to get too dark too fast. I like that. Okay, so we're gonna add this, and this is the water up here, but the sand's gonna be showing through the water, so that's why we're adding this sort of tan color throughout. I'll get my brush a little wet so it'll spread easier. And I'm not going all the way down to that line, I'm just going just above it. Go ahead and just spread that across that whole area here. And then when it gets up to that aqua color, just lightly blend those edges together. So if this is still wet, it'll blend easily into it. If it's not, you can just get your brush a little bit wet and just sort of blend right along the top of the edge there. And then let's not go all the way to the edge. Let's just keep this right there. Clean off your brush. And then we're gonna mix a light bluish shade. Very, very, very light. So I'm gonna take a tiny bit of blue and a teeny bit of magenta. So I don't want it to be bright blue. It's gonna be kind of a light periwinkle sort of shade. Not as obviously way too intense, but I just wanted to mix that color first. I'm gonna take a scoop of white and just mix it into just a teeny bit of that edge there. And very blue, I want to do a teeny bit more magenta. I want a little more of a periwinkle shade. Again, keeping it really light. Let's try that. That's way darker than I want. Let's take a big scoop of white. Mix it into that. You want it just barely darker than white. You want it to be so light that it's almost white. So we're going for a very, very light overall painting. Okay, so I think that'll be good. Let's just sort of start on that left edge, and we're just gonna fade it right into the other colors here. We're keeping this real loose for starters. Go around the edge of the shell there. Oops, got a little on there, that's okay. And just sort of streak it back and forth right on top of the other colors. The brush. And I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker periwinkle shade. So let's take a little bit of that magenta, teeny bit of blue, big scoop of white. Okay, so that's way too purple. A little more blue. A little more. Blue. It's just a very, very light bluish periwinkle color. So I'm going to add some streaks in here. These are just going to be some little waves and things going on in the water. Keeping those streaks pretty horizontal. They can have a little wiggle to them, but overall we want to keep it pretty horizontal. These aren't big crashing waves, these are just kind of lapping, calm, tropical waves. And then let's bring this down here too. Actually, let me clean off my brush. I got some of the brown mixed into it, so it's looking a little muddy. Right along the edge of the water there. Just make that kind of a fat stripe. This is going to be the seafoam that hits the edge of the water. I mean the edge of the shoreline. We're just kind of blocking in all the colors right now. It doesn't need to be a perfectly tight outline either, but just, there can be some little bumps here and there. Okay. gonna go back in up here because this layer was pretty thin. You can see the canvas coming through. Take some more of that light aqua color. And we're just gonna streak a little bit of that right in the same spot, just kind of on top of where that was before. I just want a hint of this color up at the top. I'm not gonna have a lot of that showing. Okay, clean off the brush. And then let's mix our sand color down here. So we're gonna take a little bit of yellow, because I ran out of this pile. So a little yellow, teeny bit of magenta, teeny bit of blue. Let's take a big scoop of white. We're gonna need more white. I'm just gonna take my whole pile there. And we wanna keep this sand really light as well. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I meant to do something else. Clean it off my brush. I'm going to take some of this light periwinkle color. Let's see, which one should we do? We'll just do this one. And I'm going to paint that all across the sand. Got my little sidekick down here. Poet, can you say hi? Hello? Poet. Poet. Hi. Are you playing dead? Sleepy and lazy, as always. Okay, let's get back to work here. Okay, so now we're gonna add some foam to the water. So I'm using my number 8 filbert brush for this next part. Can you see that? There we go. So I'm gonna wet that brush down, put a little bit of white, and I just want this to be very thin white. So it's very watered down there. And we're just gonna start adding some little, very thinned out, little streaks in the background. Up in the blue part, or the aqua part up here. Just gonna do some swipes and kind of swiggly. I'm just kind of taking my brush and kind of like zigzags, but very stretched out, almost like little Z's and like squiggly lines. Just keep them real subtle. Just want to create a little mix of shades and color back there in the water. And let's do it a little more over here. Again, keeping it very thinned out. And some areas can be have a little bit thicker paint, a little bit brighter, some kind of thinned out. And I'm just using the tip of the brush, so it keeps it kind of skinny. And then when we have some of these dark streaks here, let's just add a little bit of the white right on top where we did this periwinkle. Let's add a little highlight, like right on the top edge of those little streaks. Give it more dimension. We have some of this brown here. Let's just do a thin streak of white right along the top. That might look more like a wave right there. We could just do a little bit of white, a little brighter white right along the top edge. And just keeping the streaks very thinned out. Just like little swipes, little short swipes. You don't want it to look like stripes. So we're just doing, it's gonna be kind of a faint subtle look, so we're not really seeing detail. This is kind of a blurred background effect. So you don't want to get really intense and detailed. It's just sort of implying that there's water back there without seeing every little tiny, tiny detail. Again, just little swipes, just all over. You want more water, thin it out, go ahead and do that. And then let's do a light periwinkle. I'm going to mix the color with my other brush. Let's do a little lighter version of this. So let's take a little magenta, a little blue, take a big scoop of white. And again, mix the white off to the side so you don't get too dark too fast. So we don't really want to get pure white yet. Should have done a slightly light periwinkle version, but by keeping the water thinned out, I mean the white thinned out with water, it wasn't making it too intense bright white. Okay, so I have a light periwinkle shade. It's almost white. That's what you want. You want to save the very brightest white parts for the highlight on the shell and on some of the foam, so we don't want to really go pure white yet. So make a light periwinkle shade. And then let's go ahead and keep doing those. You can use your 5/8 angular brush. That's what I use to mix the color. You can use that for this part too. And I'm just using the tip of the brush, flattening my brush down so there's not too much paint on it. And I'm just again doing little streaks, little smudges and streaks back in the water. I'm doing kind of a zigzaggy pattern, but really stretched out. I'm going to do a lot more on this left side, so more of the color of the water is going to be over on the right side. Almost all of it's getting covered up, but you can see little hints of color peeking through here and there. So you want to add quite a bit. And let's go back in with a little bit of let's make a slightly darker periwinkle shade. Again, this is why you want to be really good at mixing colors, because they're probably going to be all dry on you. You're going to need to know how to mix that color kind of quick sometimes. Let's put more white in there. So I'm making another periwinkle shade. I'm going to put a little more blue. And I want to make it just a little bit darker than the last one. That is way darker right now, so we want to add more white. I'm going to thin it down. I'm going to clean off my brush because my brush is so full of paint right now from mixing. So with my brush a little bit wet, I'm going to take just a little bit of that darker periwinkle shade. It's a few shades darker than the last one. And I'm just going to add a few more streaks back in. So these will just be kind of shadows from waves. And again, just watered down, kind of thinned out. Let's just add a few little, the same basic kind of pattern. Just doing those little bits. So let's, if we had like a wave right here, this is the shadow. So let's just add a little streak going across the whole thing. And this will be like a layer of a wave coming. So by going a little darker, this will be the bottom edge of that wave sort of lapping over. Okay, let's just bring a few more little streaks here and there. And let's bring a little more of this darker color right along the bottom edge of the shoreline. Just to separate that from the edge of from the sand. Okay, let's just make that kind of a fat stripe for now. Take our 5/8 angular brush again. And let's put some white. I'm out of white again. Okay, with a little bit of white on your brush. And it's thinned out a little bit again. Now we're gonna add some little bits of the same sort of zigzaggy effect. We're gonna add, this is gonna be some of the seafoam that's in the water. We're just adding little bits right on top of all the areas. And again, the focus isn't really on the water in this painting, it's gonna be on the shell. So we don't want this to be too detailed and perfect and in focus, because we want the water in the background to sort of disappear. So we're just doing little bits of white, some little areas. You don't want this all intense, that's why you want to water it down first, so not every little part that touches the canvas will show up bright white. Little hints of bright white are okay, but overall we just want like a hint of some white showing up here and there. And you can see I'm holding this brush sideways, so the pointy part of the brush is facing that way to the left. And I'm just holding my brush kind of flat against the canvas like this, and just using the edge of the brush to create some sort of wiggly. It's almost like I'm sort of doing if you did my crashing wave tutorial with me, we did a lot of this seafoam look, and it's the same technique, so it's almost like you're creating an oval stretched out, but not being too precise about it. See how like that's sort of a oval shape, sort of stretched out and kind of overlapping over each other, so you don't want it to feel like circle, 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 or oval, oval. You're kind of creating that look using the flat part of the brush, but overlapping each other in areas, so it's not so obvious you see these oval shapes. Hopefully that makes sense. And I'm going to do a lot more of this over here, so it looks more like the sun is just washing out and brightening out that whole section of the scene here. And again, we don't want it to be too bright white yet, because in the end we're going to add in some really bright white touches to make it look like the sun's hitting those edges. Alright, so clean off your brush. The number 8 filbert, I'm going to take a beat up one, because we're going to do a bunch of texture. And we don't want a brush that's really beautiful and pristine, because we're going to mess it all up. So we're going to do some foam along this edge. So let's take that periwinkle color, and we're going to just smash our brush right along the edge of the shoreline there. Just smash and smash them. And it's okay if it's a little bit higher in places, a little lower in places. Okay, then we're going to take our white, clean off your brush, and dry it off really well. Dry it, dry it, dry it, dry it. And then put a little bit of white on the same brush. And now we're just going to tap along the top edges of all those foam parts. And it's probably going to blend into your periwinkle a little bit. That's okay. But you want to see some areas that are, oopsies. Oh, poet, I'm sorry. I just dropped that paintbrush on his head. I'm so sorry. So you're just tapping right along the top edge. And it's going to blend in a little bit. That's okay. We're going to go back over it with a whiter, bright white later. So I think I want to make this a little more blue. So that periwinkle color, let's take a teeny bit of blue, mix it into a little section of that periwinkle, and let's let's add more white because that blue is very intense. I'm gonna take a little bit, there, it's a little more bluish. And I'm just gonna tap a little bit of that bluish shade. I got too much paint on my brush. Wipe off most of the paint off your brush. So that way if it's barely any paint on your brush, it'll blend into the periwinkle or just give it an extra layer of color. I don't want to necessarily just completely cover up all the periwinkle. I just want to tap a little bit more of a bluish tone into it. So there's a mix of that periwinkle, a more purpley periwinkle, and a mix of the bluish. Okay, so just tap that onto both sides there. And if it mixes into your white a little bit, that's okay. I'm going to go back in and brighten that up later. Okay, let's let that dry a little bit. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of this bluish, more of the bluish periwinkle. I'm just going to add some streaks back in here into where that more purpley periwinkle is, and just adding a little streak here and there just to give it an extra layer. So it should be a little more blue and a little lighter. And I'm just going to streak a little bit here and there into some of those areas just to give it some little shading and shadowing here and there. Maybe a little over here. And doing that same technique, just like little horizontal smudges here and there. Just keep it loose. Don't get too stressed about it. Okay, do a little more here. A little up here. Alright, clean brush. Take my 5/8 angular brush again. I'm going to take one that's a little bit not so perfect, a little bit mashed up. I'm going to dry it off, make sure it's really dry, and then if you have some of that sand color, I guess we need to make it again. I'm going to mix with a different color, or a different brush, so I don't get that brush full of paint. So let's take if it's still wet, we started mixing that. A little bit of yellow, teeny bit of magenta, and a teeny bit of blue. So we're going to make a tan color. And that is way too yellow right now. So we're going to take a big scoop of white and mix that together. And put a little more magenta. Whoa, that was a lot. Now we got pink. We don't want pink. A little more yellow. It's very peachy right now. Let's take a teeny bit of blue. Tone it down a little bit. By adding the blue, it's making it a little more grayish, not so bright. When you're using just two primary colors like magenta and yellow, or yellow and blue, or magenta and blue, you're going to get a vibrant, bright color. And the way to kick it back and tone it down is to add the third primary into it. Okay, let's see. Let's take some more white and see where we're at here. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we've got this light tan color. Let's take a little more of that. So it should be a very light tan color. And I'm mixing with this brush, but I'm gonna actually paint with my messed up brush now. Make sure it's really dry. And I'm gonna smash it into my color and just smash my brush so the bristles are sticking out kind of crazy. And then I'm lightly tapping all over the sand. And turn your brush different directions so you don't get that same exact pattern that your brush will make with the bristles. So by doing this, I'm keeping it really textury by just lightly tapping on the canvas all over. And you just take your time with it. You want to see little bits of texture all over the sand. This is why we did the periwinkle wash color first, so some of that will show through. We're going to go over all of the sand here, but we want just a little hint of that periwinkle showing through. Lots and lots of texture. And another reason why you don't want to smash down hard with your brush, if you smash down too hard, it's going to make big, giant texture marks. And we want the sand to look like tiny little fine grains of sand. That's why just barely tapping on the canvas will give each of those little bristles a chance to make their individual little marks. And turn your brush different directions. Now if you're crazy impatient and this is driving you nuts, you can take a bigger brush if you want to. You can do like a 1-inch wash brush, a messed up one, or you could take a big brush like this. These are like $1 or $2 from Home Depot, the chip brushes. Those are great for texture. I use these all the time, especially when I'm doing murals because the walls are much larger. So you could just do this. You just want to make sure you're not going to smash down too hard and get too big of a texture mark. So you just, again, barely tap on there. And just very lightly. Very lightly. Smash. Now, you don't even have to clean off your brush. I'm going to take a little bit of white. This white is really thick. I don't know why. And then smash that up. Smash. And then do little texture all over the sand with tiny bits of white. Okay, so you should be able to see a lot of texture in the sand. Barely any of that periwinkle showing through, but you should see a little bit of that popping through here and there. Okay, I think that's good for now. Clean off your brush. And let's go back into the foam here. You can use your messed up number 8 filbert. And we're gonna put a little bit of white on your brush. Just a little bit, and we're gonna go on top of the foamy edge again. So right along the top edge. And we're just gonna, you don't have to make it really textury this time. You can actually make it kind of smooth on the edge a little bit. A nice clean edge on the top. And then we'll go a little bit textury below that. So a little white, smooth edge on the top. And you can do a little texture about halfway down. And then let's go ahead and add a few little bits of bright white just here and there out in the water. Just so it looks like maybe the sun's hitting a few little areas. And keep this very minimal. We don't want to go crazy with the white, just little bits here and there. Do some back here. As if the sun was sparkling down the water. Okay, we're gonna work on our shell now. So we're gonna paint the shell a very light periwinkle color again. So if you still have some of that, hopefully you do. If not, let's make some more. So that was white and a teeny bit of blue, a teeny bit of magenta. And that was a lot right there, so let's lighten that up a lot. And you want this to be very, very, very light. Let's see, that, let's go lighter than that. And you can use your number 8 filbert or your, I'm gonna switch to my 5/8 angular brush. And of course you can use whatever brushes work for you. You don't have to use these ones I'm using, but a lot of times beginners want to know exactly what I'm using, so that's why I've always tell you what I'm using. Okay, let's see. Yeah, let's do a very light periwinkle. I'm just gonna paint the whole shell, except for this little underneath part here. And then let's take a little bit, of a darker periwinkle shade. And let's just bring a little bit of a shadow right on this side here. So if this is still wet, it should blend in nicely. If it's dry, just add a little bit of water to your darker periwinkle. More blue. I'm running out of paint. And I'm just going to blend it right into that right side there. Let's have it curve around into that little section like that. Getting my brush a little wet so I can make a softer blend here, and just fade it out. Keep that edge nice and precise. And then take some white. If you have a little bit of water on your brush, it'll be a smoother blend. And we're gonna add a highlight, a bright highlight, right along this side here. So the sun is coming this way, so we want the light hitting right along that edge. So just take a little bit of white, right along that edge, like to the top of it, and then curve around. Now if your periwinkle's still a little wet, it's probably blending in like mine is, so let's let this dry a little more first. I'll just blend that in for now. Yeah. I'm gonna let that dry a little bit. So we're gonna mix the color that's gonna be in the inside part of the shell. let's take I'm using my filbert brush. We're gonna mix kind of a raw sienna shade, so kind of like this dark tan color. Let's take a little bit of yellow, a little teeny bit of magenta, and a teeny bit of blue. Scoop of white. So we don't want it to be that dark. That's a little bit too bright for the inside of the shell there. Let's take a teeny bit of blue. Yeah, that goes so far. Mix that in. A little more magenta. We want more of a warm brownish, like a raw sienna shade. Let's check that out. That's a little too green. Teeny more magenta. That'll work. So you're gonna fill in this little underside. So then let's take a teeny bit of white. We want to get a little bit lighter towards the top here. Right up in this corner. Just a teeny bit of white. Right up in there. And we're just gonna fade it down a little bit. Just to make it look like the sun is shining inside there and the bright part of it is up in that little nook. And it's just fading out. So I have barely any white on my brush. I'm just lightly fading it out. Okay, that'll be good for now. And clean off the brush. And then let's take a little bit of, we're gonna add a little bit of a darker shade right on this inner part of the shell. Take some blue, teeny bit of magenta, and a little bit of yellow. We're gonna make a dark brown, almost black. A little more magenta. If you start with a very dark purple and then add a teeny bit of yellow to it, you'll get a deep dark brownish shade. And we're just going to do a little bit, just a little smudge right on this section of the shell. Oh, you're so loud. It's just a little spot that's on the shell. Let's do a little right here too. Okay, we can go back in and fix that later if we need to. Clean off your brush. Dry. Let's take a little bit of that white again. And we're going to add a bright highlight right on this edge. Bright white. Come down, all the way down to the point there. And let's add a skinny little white edge right along this edge of the shell here. It's okay if it's not a completely solid white line. Let's just put a skinny little edge there. And get a little more white right on the very top. And now we're going to mix a dark brown for those stripes on the shell. Let's take a scoop of red. We could even just mix it into that dark color we started. Scoop of red, scoop of yellow. So we'll start off with kind of an orange color and then add a little bit of blue which there's blue in that one, so that's why I just mixed it right into that pile. So it's pretty much just magenta and blue, a teeny bit of yellow, which this is the same mix of colors, but just more magenta and yellow to get that like a burnt sienna look. Okay, I think that'll be pretty good. Clean off that brush, and then you can either use a little tiny brush, or if you use your number 8 filbert and you're just using the very tip of the brush, you can get a nice skinny line for like the really detailed parts. So let's just start off. You want to make sure when you're doing these stripes that they're curving around the shape of the shell. So I'm going to start with some of them over here. So there's going to be like a little skinny line. Actually, let's start off with just a little smudge around this. Get this shape going on here. Let's take a little of this color and get that little curved part of the shell. Just going to do a little smudge of that color right there. Okay. So you're going to have these little skinny lines and they're going to kind of wrap around. So let's just start on this edge here. I'll get the first one going and then you'll see what I'm talking about. So it's going to be a little bit wider along the edge, and then it's going to connect. There's going to be kind of like a little stripes wrapping around. You can start with the skinny part and it'll curve, but then it's going to sort of wrap around this side here. And obviously they don't have to be these exact shapes as mine, but you get a few going here and you'll get the idea. So it's going to give the shell shape is this part right here. It needs to feel like it's sort of wrapping around the back of the shell. These little stripes are thicker here and wider here. And then kind of squiggly. And then they all sort of meet kind of in the center of the shell there. So you see what I mean? How it kind of curves around, and then this is a little more flat here. So these would all sort of meet together like this. This white might not be dry yet, so I'm going to hold off on that part. Let's just continue doing some little stripy things over here. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a lighter shade, taking a little bit of white to that color. I'm just going to lighten up the edges of this little smudge a little bit. So it's not such a perfect shape. I'll get my brush a little bit wet. Just sort of fade that off. Blend it in a little. Let's just do a little smudge of color right inside that part there. And then let's make this a little darker. Let's take a teeny bit of that darker brown and just do a little edge, thin little edge along the bottom there and in this corner. And this is very watered down, so it's a thin wash, just to sort of fade that in, give it a little bit of shadow. I barely have any paint on my brush, and a little bit of water. I'm just getting a little bit darker in there. Clean my brush off, so I just have a damp brush. Sort of rub my little bit of color in here. So it's just a little bit of extra color there. So clean off your filbert brush, water it down a little bit, and I'm going to put a little bit of white You want to make sure this is really dry first. And I'm just thinning out a little bit of white. You don't want it too thin, you want it to show up, but you need it a little bit thinned out so it's gonna flow easier. We're just gonna add a highlight right along that top, starting from the top. So mine wasn't completely dry, and I smeared the brown. So it's not showing up white. So I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'm gonna go back in later with the pure white. So let's take a little bit of white. It's okay if this part isn't completely bright white. We're just gonna put a little bit of white on the edge of your brush. And if you wanna use a little tiny liner brush, that might even be better. If you can't get it skinny, I'm just adding a little white highlight just back along that edge of the shell, that very, very thin line. And I'm gonna do it just right along where this curves. Switch to a tiny brush. That one got a little too fat. I'm using my little tiny number 2 round. I'm gonna go back to the filbert. I'm gonna make a darker periwinkle color. So start with a purple, a little magenta, a little blue, a little bit of white. Okay, so I'm going to water that down. A little bit of water, just a little bit. Make sure this is really dry, so you might want to wait a minute. And I'm just going to add a little highlight right along the edge, just to kind of clean up that edge. And I want it thinned out because I don't want to cover up all my brown, but I want a very washed out layer, so it's like a transparent, sort of translucent shadow color. And I'm just doing a nice tight edge. Make sure it's thinned out. If you need to add a little more water. You don't want it to feel like a stripe, so just kind of thin it out and then fade it right into the edge of your shell. Okay, we can do a little bit of this right on the other side of that white, bright white edge. This is like a little tiny little lip on the edge of the shell. I'm just going to make that white stand out by going right next to the white highlight you did. Just a tiny bit of this. A little skinny line, then fade it out. It's going to add some shape to that too. And just lightly fade it out. Again, make sure your shell's really dry first. I should have waited a little longer, but I was impatient. So. And see how I'm just kind of fading that out just with a little bit of water on my brush. I'm just fading out that periwinkle. So it's creating a little more shadow there. I'm going to thin out a little bit of that color. Remember what we did? It was kind of like this shade. No, not like that. It's more of a, let's just mix it again. Magenta, yellow, start with kind of an orange color, and then add a teeny bit of blue. And then some white. So we're trying to make that shade that we had inside there. That'll work. So I'm gonna thin this out with some water and barely any paint on my brush. I'm gonna add, it's gonna be a little reflection in the sand. So right next to this, you wanna keep it like inside the shell. So the light is shining through the shell and spreading some of this color onto the sand. So I'm just gonna do a little smudge of that. I'm just gonna sort of fade it out with some water. the light shining through the shell and reflecting down onto the sand. Okay, now we're gonna add some shadows, some dramatic shadows behind the shell. So let's make a periwinkle color. If you don't already have some, you might need to make more. Let's take a little more white on that. And that was too much, so now I need to take some blue, some magenta, and some white. Now this is going to be, again, a very watered down, faint shadow. We want it to be almost translucent, transparent. So you could, if you have medium, glazing medium, this is the one I always use by Windsor Newton. You see that? Is that showing up? I love this one. So you can use water if you don't have this glazing medium. That'll be fine. I like to use the glazing medium only because it gives me more control of the paint sometimes. But water's fine if you just have fun. Just put a little bit of that on your palette, and then you're going to mix some of that glazing medium into it. Clean it off my brush. Start fresh. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that color into my glazing medium. And with water, if you use too much water, you can get drips and you can mess up your painting because it can lift off some of the other colors. With the glazing medium, you can use as much of this glazing medium as you need to, and you'll be fine. So I start off with just a little bit of paint mixed into the glazing medium. So our shadow is going to be coming right from the tip of this shell, and then we're going to come off the edge, and then about right here. So if you were to picture the sun shining on the shell, it's going to cast a shadow from like here. So here, I'm just going to paint right underneath the shell, and then I'm just going to have it fade out. I think I need a little more paint on my brush. And I'm going to go right on top of the color we just did there. So come right up to the edge of that shell there, the inside edge. And I'm going to have kind of a wiggly line. Let's have this just sort of fade right off the edge. And by using a thinned out water, either with water or the glazing medium, some of the sand texture will show through it. That's why we want it to be really see-through. I want this to come out this way a little more. You gotta work pretty quick because you don't want to lift up your bottom layers of paint. I just swiped black on my canvas. How do I get black on there? Oh well. Okay, let's get a little more of that color. Let's have it swoop right down. Oh my gosh, I keep swiping black on my painting. You don't want black. Don't do that. And again, get right up in there. So it could be a little bit darker right at the base, right underneath where the base of the shell is. That can be a little darker, but you want it to fade out as it's going further away because the sun is casting that shadow and it's getting thinner as it spreads across there. Make a little more periwinkle. darker. That's way darker. See, I'm getting darker right at the base of the shell. So that's going to be the darkest part of the shadow. That same color, and we're going to do a very thin little edge, this darker color, right at the base of the water line. Just a teeny thin little line. Now we can go in and add that white highlight. This should be very dry. You want a clean brush with some white, starting from the top. Curve right down to the tip. Still have some brown in there, but oh well. Hopefully you don't. I'll go back in and touch up some of these little white highlights. And I'm going to add a very thinned out, watered down white and just a little hint of a little reflection on the dark side of the shell. But take some of that shadow color, and we're going to just do a little shadow right along the edge of the water. So again, you want this transparent, so very watered down, or use your glazing medium. And this is just a little shadow that the waves are hitting on the shore. You can also take a little bit of that thin watered down shadow color and do right inside the shell. Very thin, so you still want that brown to show through, but we just want a very translucent layer on top of that inside of the shell. If you feel like it needs any more details, you can do that now. Okay. If you want to add any more bits of white, now's the time to do any white highlights. I'm going to add just a little more, a few smudges, now that everything should be really dry. I'm just doing little taps to brighten up a few little areas here and there with white. I'm just going to do a few little dots here and there, so it looks like the sun's just sort of sparkling on the water a little bit. much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell to get notified when we upload new videos. We, or me, me poet, we. Poet. Hi, how's it going?